Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very informative show coming right up. Our first guest is Victoria Namkung, and she's been a writer for over 20 years, and she's out of LA. She also is a journalist, an essayist, and a cultural commentator. Her work's been featured in the Los Angeles Times, NBC News, Vice, Washington Post, USA Today, InStyle, and the Los Angeles Magazine, among many other publications. As a speaker and panelist, she's appeared at the AAAS Conference, Mixed Remixed, and the Asian American Journalists Association. So Victoria is here today to talk to us about her latest novel, These Violent Delights. So let's welcome to the show, Victoria.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be chatting with you.
Oh, do you know what? It is such an honor to be spending this time with you. I mean, my goodness, your work has been featured everywhere that's important in my book, you know. So if they don't have you writing for them, they just got bumped off the list of importance. So, you know. But I really enjoyed your book, These Violent Delights. And so, you know, I'd like to learn a little bit more about you and what got you started writing.
Sure. Well, I was a very curious child. I'm still a very curious adult. But when I was around 12, I just had a pivotal summer where I went to the UC Irvine Writers Camp. It's for young scholars. So I was 12 years old, and that's where I first learned about writing. And they covered journalism as well as some short story exercises and different things. And it just really spurred me to learn more. And I would say going back to junior high after that summer, I just started devouring as many books as I could, and I started dreaming about one day writing my own books. But I think that a lot of women do this. I kind of got in my own way. I would tell myself all the time that I was not qualified to write a novel, even though I was. And so I worked for about 20 years as a journalist. And, of course, deep down inside, I still wanted to be pursuing fiction or other types of writing, but journalism was how I was making my living. And I had a really nice, long relationship with the Los Angeles Times. I freelanced for them for about 15 years. And I worked for a lot of other exciting magazines, and I covered celebrities for a long time. And so I was doing all these things, but I think deep down I always knew I would turn to books. So I'm really happy that I now have my second novel out, coming out. And it's really, really exciting to finally have accomplished my childhood dream from age 12.
Well, hey, and kudos to you, because it's so important to do what we're passionate about. And I can see that you were extremely passionate about this book. I mean, it was very well written and extremely compelling. And we're not going to go over the book a whole lot because it just came out. I want everyone to go get their own copy of These Violent Delights. It's just an extraordinary book. You know, so when you were doing, you know, you kind of got this point like, okay, I'm going to work on my second book. How did this story come to you? How did you decide that this is what you were going to write?
Well, I'm sure, like you and all of your listeners, you've seen these headlines, you know, for years, for our whole lifetime and before, about teacher and students having illicit relationships. You know, the most famous case is probably Mary Kay Letourneau, who went on, you know, to marry her former student and have children with him, and she served jail time due to that. You know, this whole concept is sort of mythologized in songs like Hot for Teacher, you know, from Van Halen, or Don't Stand So Close to Me. So I was always aware of this issue, and I had my own experiences with teachers and coaches being inappropriate with friends of mine and with me on occasion. And I just, you know, I was looking for a topic for my second book. I think I was feeling like I really wanted to do something that centered the women's experience, because a lot of times in fiction, women are just sort of there, you know, as like domestic roles, or there's a lot of strong women represented in crime fiction, which is interesting. But, you know, when you just look at straight fiction and literature, I think There's still many stories to be told about, what it's like to move through the world as a young woman or as a woman. And so I started seeing more cases coming up, unfortunately. It's sort of reminiscent of the Catholic Church scandals and cover-ups. It, seemed like every week that would pass, a new headline would come out about a teacher who was doing something with a student, and then the school was either covering that up or impeding an investigation. And I started getting very angry about that. And so I thought, how can I say what I want to say about this topic? I didn't think it would just be a news article. I thought it should be something meatier. And so that's how I decided ultimately to set this as the, plot of my new novel.
Well, good for you. I went through that as well, and I think many women did. I mean,
yes.
I had that happen. It was in the 80s. And it was with a teacher that I ended up having to report to the school district. But, I mean, you get these kind of things that happen. You're like, wow, what? You're just there to learn. And not that.
Right.
Yeah.
It does happen to boys, too, and I always, like to point that out, that it's not just girls that this happens to, but it does happen to girls at a much higher rate, and that is something that needs to be stated, because a lot of men that I mention this subject to, they immediately become defensive, like, oh, I'm writing this book that's going to paint men as, these evil monsters. That's not the case at all. This book is about one bad teacher and women who band together to help take him down to prevent him from doing this further to other students. And there's some great male characters in the book who are extremely helpful to the women who are going up against him. And so, yeah, it is unfortunately something that most people have experience with. And as I was researching the book and talking about it with friends or colleagues, if you just bring up this subject, like, oh, when you were in high school, did you ever know a student who had an affair with a teacher? Every single person I've talked to has had a story. So either it happened to them, or they knew someone, or it was a huge scandal at their school. And in Los Angeles, it's particularly egregious. Just in the last, I think it's decade, LAUSD has paid out something like $300 million to victims. Wow. So that is a lot of money. LA, that's where I live. It's notorious for its failing schools, and, a lot of people don't even want to send their kids to the public school system. So, that sort of figure just enrages me like nothing else, because, $300 million could do so much for children or for educational programs to prevent this type of thing. So it seems like schools and administrators, they don't often learn these lessons, and that it's better to nip these things in the bud, get rid of these bad teachers immediately, and prevent them from going on to reoffend at other schools. So I'm hoping this book will start a conversation about that topic, because it seems like we've become a little desensitized, from seeing these headlines, and we just chalk it up like, oh, this is a part of life. But no child should ever have to go to school being worried that their teacher is going to come on to them.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, they've got different categories for stuff like that now than they did when I was growing up, and that's appropriately so, because, I mean, children should be able to go to school, boys and girls, and not feel like the teacher's going to come on to them or feel uncomfortable in any way because of what the teacher's doing or the teacher's touching them. None of that,
Right. And a lot of these teachers, I research cases, at all these famous schools, because, there's also this misconception that this only happens to poor kids or kids who are maybe on their own after school, or, they're from single parent. That's not true. It actually happens across every racial and socioeconomic background. And in fact, at some of these, quote unquote, wealthy private schools like Exeter or Choate, Rosemary Hall, which I actually attended there when I was 15, they've had some of the biggest scandals in history as far as teachers, where there's 60 victims, 80 victims, and things that were covered up for decades. It's just unacceptable. It's just shocking to me that we could let things get this far as a society, and that this wouldn't be something that would get people out in the streets. And maybe it's because sexuality is sort of a taboo subject, and a lot of times these victims are what's called compliant victims, where they actually willingly enter into these relationships. I knew a girl who was 15, and she had a relationship with a 40-year-old man, and she wanted to do that, So in her mind, she was consenting, but we all know that a 15-year-old cannot legally consent to sex with a 40-year-old man. So these things just need to be talked about more and brought a little bit more out into the open, because I think that shame associated with sexuality or wanting to do something that feels good or wanting to experiment, it's very natural for kids or teens to want to experiment. What's not natural is for a teacher to take advantage of that.
Yeah, because they're really taking advantage of that authority. And it's not, it's a few bad apples within the mix. I've had, and I'm sure you have too, we've had some great teachers along the way.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Of course.
But
yes.
But we're specifically talking about those bad ones.
Sure, absolutely. I actually worship teachers. I think it's probably, I put teachers and nurses and people like that, no one is in teaching for the money, obviously. People are in teaching because they have this passion, for young people or to educate the next generation. So yes, of course, most teachers are wonderful members of our community who act as, surrogate parents throughout the day, and they're going through all kinds of things. I talked to a teacher from a very prominent school here in Los Angeles while I was doing research, and he said, we're just trying to keep the kids alive. It's like they have so many issues. Kids are cutting, they're depressed, they have anxiety, they're doing all the, sexting and social media stuff and worried about getting into college. And so, it struck me that, it's not that a teacher wakes up and says, you know what, I want to be complicit in the abuse of another, student today. It's of course not. These things, there are some bad apples, and then there are some teachers who they're walking a very fine line. And, if a student comes on to them, they have to make that choice of how they're going to handle that. And some people, unfortunately, fail that test.
Well, it's interesting because, it really allows those that are predators to prey on young people, because at 15, you can't drive a car, you can't make adult decisions, you can't even vote, so there's a lot of critical thinking that isn't being able to be applied, so they can't make adult decisions. And it's Absolutely. Up to the teacher that's there to go ahead and be the one in charge and just look out for all the children's welfare. And and they are dealing with so much more nowadays, my goodness, than they were when I was a kid. I'm not envious to be a student today, between the political climate and the economy and, jobs and all these things. It's very overwhelming. And so then you throw in this on top of it that, maybe you flirted with your teacher and now you guys are texting and it's something's, it's like this thrill. But what you were talking about, like that power imbalance, it can never be equal. It can never be consensual. It just, even in college, I had some friends who dated professors like before. Today I believe most schools have policies that that's not allowed. But when I was in college, it was very much allowed. And, I was always like, it just rubbed me the wrong way. Even if the woman was 21, I just thought, there's no way. If this goes awry, he could change her grade. He could threaten her, that he's going to make this public. There's so many things a teacher can do, to hold that power over, the younger students. So, I just don't think it's a good idea to date your teacher regardless of age. I just really think the power dynamic makes it impossible to have a fair and equal relationship. Well, and and to kind of get back to your book a little bit, but this is definitely part of it, and I think it hits so many people because, like as you were saying, your book would really appeal to so many people because there's that. I know of at least 5 or 6 people that had issues with their teachers,
Wow.
And it's really interesting. It's like we think about it and we ask friends, did you know a teacher who was inappropriate or would hit on you or something like that? If it wasn't with them, they knew somebody that had happened with. So,
right,
and then the school's job is to they're always looking on, to kind of keep things really quiet because they're concerned about their own liability.
Absolutely.
It's like their perspective is not really about the student, it's about minimizing liability.
Absolutely. And when I was in high school in the 90s in Orange County, California, which is a very conservative kind of place, these things, it was just never even talked about. There was never a conversation of, here's what you do if a teacher ever makes, this kind of comment to you, or if a teacher asks you out, or if a teacher contacts you outside of school. I mean, it was never discussed. And so I think it was very known that it was not to be discussed, even if something did happen. And I had something that sounds more innocent compared to, the story in my book, but I had a swim coach ask me to sit on his lap, while I was in a bathing suit when I was 14. And it's one of my biggest regrets in life that I didn't say anything, that I didn't tell anyone. But I didn't feel like to tell anyone because the athletic director, who was his boss, I had heard was having sex with one of our senior age cheerleaders who was, probably 17 or 18. So it didn't feel very safe, like that was, a place to report it. And then our city being Irvine, where I grew up, is, everyone knows everyone. And I just knew that more harm would come to me than to the coach. I knew that like 1,000%. And I also knew that if I told my parents, they would be so upset that they would either pull me out of school or they would possibly do something to harm this coach. And then they would be in trouble and possibly getting arrested. So,
like any reasonable parent, pretty much, right?
Exactly. I mean, if I told my dad some of the things that happened to me, I mean, I have no doubt he would physically harm these people. And so, now you're like traumatized, and then you're also not really able to tell anybody. So it's a very hard place to be. And I try not to be too hard on myself about my 14 or 15-year-old self. But, like you were saying, you can't drive at that age. You can't vote. I mean, there's reasons for that. Like a teenager's brain is not even fully formed. There's no way to see down the line 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, to what this all means for you if you're in some sort of illicit relationship with a teacher.
Well, hey, I say kudos to you because you made a really good choice through a very difficult situation, and you really thought of it as an adult. You went through each thing going, okay, let's look at all these outcomes, and it was the best way to approach it. And it's interesting that we have to do that. And I think your book really brings to light a topic that, while it's a novel, it's something that really we need to be having more discussion on.
I think so, and, it's interesting the timing that the book was released, right after the Harvey Weinstein revelations and all these other revelations that are coming out about other people in Hollywood or in the business community or Silicon Valley. I think women are really fed up, right now. It doesn't matter what the political leanings are, the religious leanings. Nobody wants to be treated this way. Nobody wants their children to be treated this way. And so it's funny because when I started writing, obviously I had no idea this would be the climate today, but it actually has been beneficial because people are contacting me privately and telling me their stories, and people are thanking me, for getting this topic out there. And that feels really wonderful because I don't think it's been dealt with much in fiction. There was the book Sleepers and a movie, and that dealt with boys abuse at like a group home or boarding school type of environment. But to have a contemporary story, I think it is important. A lot of reviewers have said it feels like nonfiction, and I take that as a compliment because, I was trying to write something that felt extremely real, and it follows the perspectives of several different women who've been abused by the same teacher, and they all have different ways that they dealt with it. One of them never told anybody. One of them, confided in a few people. One of them went on to have a horrible outcome. It really traumatized her. And so, I think trauma is a subject like we often talk about with the military, but we don't always talk about it with victims of sexual assault or abuse or even harassment, and how these things can have very long-lasting effects, even when you don't want them to, even when you want to just push it away and not think about it.
Well, and there's been an ongoing, over the last few years when we've had people that have been in positions of power taking advantage of other people, students or what have you, or, any kind of indiscretions when it comes, when it's older with somebody that's younger, they tend to kind of sweep it under the rug like, well, it's not that big a deal. When it really is that big a deal.
It is, and, I'm glad you said that, because there's two reactions that I get to my novel that kind of get under my skin a little bit. One is a lot of people say, girls are, they're very forward today. Girls, some of them are coming on really strong to these teachers, as if that should make it excusable, because maybe some girls were, I interviewed a male teacher who told me that some of his female students write him love notes. Well, that is a very awkward position to be in as the teacher, and so it's that teacher's role now to bring that to the school psychologist or whoever it is in the administration, and that there should be a policy in place of here's how we handle this kind of thing. Because, of course, I had a crush on one of my teachers before. I mean, I'm sure everybody has. The other thing that bothers me is male friends of mine or male acquaintances, as soon as they hear what the topic of this book is, they say, I wish my teacher molested me. Because as a horny, 14-year-old boy, of course, they're looking at their attractive female teacher, wishing that she would turn their life into the music video for Hot for Teacher. But they don't realize that many boys have been abused by these women, female teachers, and they are also traumatized. The boys do not have better outcomes than the girls. The boys maybe temporarily feel like they can gloat about this, or this is some sort of cool thing that an older woman, slept with them. But if they're underage, they're also not able to consent. So I think that's a very, it's a quick thing to react, in that way, like, oh, of course, it's harmless. It's fun. It's, something we hear about in the movies and, music. But I don't find it funny. I really don't. And after studying this for over a year, it actually makes me very sick to think that any teacher could do this. So I don't care the gender of the victim. It's wrong all around.
It's kind of like when Donna Karan was kind of saying the same kind of thing on a kind of in a different note, saying kind of were women really asking for it,
right,
kind of
right.
What her quote was. And it's, no one asks, and even people who think that might be something that, as their older self will be like, well, hey, my teacher was hot. When you're a young kid and all of a sudden you're dealing with your teacher being pregnant, that's no fun either.
Right. No,
that's not that hot after a while.
Absolutely. And, a lot of these female teachers are often married, and, who's to say one of, their spouse might go after the student. I mean, it's a very dangerous game to play, and social media has made it a lot easier. I think 80% since social media, and that's because it is so easy for a teacher to just groom a child over texting or over Instagram or, Facebook messages, and they don't even have to do it in the classroom. They can just take it off campus and, be messaging. Some of these teachers who've been caught have sent students 15,000 messages. I mean, that's pretty shocking to me. So, yeah, we just have to be very aware, and I would say to any parent listening that, you definitely got to monitor social media and the iPhones and the smartphones. And yeah, we're
just
dealing
be
with
aware.
a lot of stuff. Yeah, being aware of this, exactly. And if your kid starts acting different, or all of a sudden, was an A student, now is getting B's, I mean, that's a sign something is really wrong. And, I was a really mature child who was, considered intelligent and well-spoken, and I still, like I said, didn't tell my parents. There's a lot of kids who still will not tell their parents, when something happens. And, it's just a deep shame, and people are really afraid. They see what victims go through. They see how they're treated in the press. They see how everybody will blame it. What were you wearing? What did you say? Did you have sex before? It becomes this interrogation on the victim as opposed to the perpetrator. So, yeah, my novel, I just hope, will provide a different perspective. It's centered on the the women's experience, and the teacher really doesn't even have much of a say in the novel. He's sort of just a separate character that's referred to, but I didn't want him to have a say because there's nothing you could say that would excuse it.
Well, and I love how you are doing this from the experience of the victims, and each one has their own different aspect of how it's affecting them, and it's really, I think there's many people that would be like, okay, I can really relate to this character or this one based on just their own personal experiences and maybe something that they've gone through.
Yeah, I hope so. I really tried to provide a diversity of experience and a diversity of type of female character.
Mm-hmm. You did very well with it. I loved it. I thought it was very well, and I can see where people feel that it's a nonfiction because you're reading it and you're like, wait a minute, like, where did this happen? Because it feels like you can relate it to something that's happening today. It feels like something that someone has gone through. You've done such great research with this, So I love how your books are something that you have really put a lot of passion in, and you've done a lot of research for this book. What are you working on now? Because I know writers always have something else they're working on, or are you just taking a breather at this point?
I am definitely taking a breather. I have written 2 novels in 3 years or so. So for me, that's plenty. But yes, I do have an idea for my next book, which would be nonfiction. It would be sort of like a memoir. I mentioned that I used to be a celebrity reporter, and I've been sitting on hundreds of stories that I've never shared publicly with anybody from, just 15 years covering A-list celebrities and being with them in their hotel rooms and backstage and all kinds of places. And it would be a much more lighthearted type of book, obviously, than the one I just wrote. I think I need a break. This book actually sent me into a minor depression. It was very heavy, to read those stories every day and to be talking to real people who, I talked to a lot of students from these schools and even students who weren't victims themselves, but their best friend was the victim. It affected them greatly. It affected, that trust you have. You grow up thinking teachers are like priests or doctors or your parent. It's like you just trust them and you respect them. And so it was, very devastating to hear all these accounts day after day. And so I think I definitely need to do something a little more lighthearted, and then I can get back to trying to get back
hit
to
the heavy topics
and things like that. Yeah. So I would like to write some funny stories, just in a way, and I've been talking with my publisher about that.
I can't wait for that one. Yeah. Well, and I can see where this would be really tough because, this is a book that, can really pull on your heartstrings, and you can get that emotional attachment to it, especially if you know somebody or it's happened to you and you're like, whoa, gosh, So
and I think just seeing it play out in real life too, like seeing these stories play out while you're also trying to promote this book or, reading.
And just what's happening,
Yeah, it just starts weighing on you. And so I feel very, empowered and happy that I can put this book out because that's a wonderful thing. And the reaction's been so positive, and so I'm really thrilled by that. I feel like, maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe that wasn't the right time for this book, but I think now is the right time. So I'm very grateful, that it did come out at this time. And I think it's also in reaction just to a lot of the news media and, even journalists, and I am a journalist and I love journalism, but even journalists are guilty of it where they blame the victim, and it could just be the way they write a headline or the way they cover a story. So, we just all need to be more diligent as a society to prevent things like this from happening. And, hopefully this book can be a good conversation starter for parents and kids.
Well, awareness is a big starting point for anything, and once people have an awareness, I was talking with somebody the other day, and her husband went to her, and it was in regards to this kind of a topic, and said, "This really happens to women. This happens in the workplace."
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, this happens everywhere.
Yes.
And so, it's having that awareness and bringing these discussions forward allows people to have like an understanding. It's like, hey, we've got a problem here, and as a society, we really need to address it because it's not okay.
I agree. And, my husband, after the Harvey Weinstein scandal, had said something to me along the lines of, like, what can I do? He was so upset, and he always believes these stories when he hears them and is very supportive. But, I think he didn't realize the extent of it, and it wasn't intentional. It's just these things don't always get talked about openly. And so he said, what can I do? And I think he was even feeling a little helpless about it. And I said, why don't you just, the next time you hear this sort of thing or this sort of joke made or somebody, treating this kind of thing as a joke, like just call that person out on it. And you don't have to do it in a mean way. You can treat it as a joke, like, dude, it's 2017. We don't talk like this anymore. There's so many ways, and we need men to help us. It's not women have tried, women have been dealing with this since the dawn of time. It's men's turn to get involved and to help and to be allies. And so it is really encouraging. I have seen some male friends, really taking this issue on, and they're posting a lot about it and trying to curb this behavior. And a lot of people don't realize until they have a daughter that this sort of thing happens. So It shouldn't take having a daughter, though. You should care just about your fellow citizens and humans enough to want to do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, from the women, for men looking, I mean, they've got wives and daughters and sisters and mothers, and for us women, we've got brothers and fathers and other male figures in our family as well, and it's not okay either on either side for this kind
No, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, gosh, I, again, loved your book, These Violent Delights, and I know we kind of talked about it a little bit, but that's okay because we don't want to give the entire story away. You have to go buy your own copy, and and it's available, so you want to go pick those up. So, Victoria, where can people connect with you and be part of your community?
Sure. So my website is just my name. It's victorianamkung.com, which is N like Nancy, A, M like Mary, Kung. And all my events are listed there. On social media, I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, just at Victoria Namkung. I'm the only person in the entire world with this name, so it's not hard to find me. So Google me, you'll find me.
That made that easy.
It makes it very, very easy.
Yeah, and hey, I know in a couple of days you're going to be over at the Book Soup on Sunset Boulevard in West Hollywood, so how exciting.
Yes, I'm very excited. It's my favorite bookstore, and they've, survived all the bookstore closings of the last 20 years. Sunset Strip is a very iconic location, so I'll be reading on Monday, December 4th from 7 to 8 o'clock and taking questions. And I read at Book Soup for my first novel, and there were some really great questions asked. So I'm very excited because their audience and the fans are like real diehard book lovers. So it's always a treat for an author to get to be around people who love books.
Oh, well, and I know you've got a couple other events coming up, and our listeners can go to your website, and we're going to actually have the link right here where they can click on that as well, so they can see the other locations and follow you on social media, be part of your community, and of course, get your book, These Violent Delights. So, Victoria, thank you so much for taking your time and sharing your insights and, of course, your amazing book and being on our show today.
Thank you so much, Marianne. I had a great time.
Oh, this was just fabulous. Anytime you decide you're going to write another book, let us know. We'd love to have you back.
I will.
Yeah. I mean, for a heavy topic to talk about, we had a great time. So we are going to pause here for a quick break, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 1-2-3 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
Do you know that you can become a genius at any age? Do you know that you can change your life and create a brilliant life for yourself? Hi, I am Olympia LaPointe, an award-winning rocket scientist who you more than likely have seen on TED Talks, Impact Theory, and PBS. Check out my latest book, Answers Unleashed, The Science of Unleashing Your Brain's Power. Simply go to AnswersUnleashed.com books and check it out for yourself. You'll find the tools to help you create the life you've always wanted.
The highly acclaimed and newly released book, The Hand Part 2 by Lynn Van Praagh Grattan, describes the journey between a psychic medium and a family who lost a son. Messages from Beyond Eternity's Gate is of love and healing. For more information, visit www.lynnvanpraagh-grattan.com. That's www.lynnvanpraagh-grattan.com.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. So our next guest, Naama Bloom, is here today to talk to us about her new book, Helloflo, The Guide, Period. So Naama is the founder of Helloflo.com, and that is a modern-day health site for girls and women. And her mission is to create a place where women and girls can learn about their bodies in an open and honest way without any shame and with a healthy dose of humor. Naama has produced 2 videos on YouTube talking about these topics that have been viewed more than 50 million times that show girls that while puberty can be kind of funny and awkward, it also could be very empowering. So let's welcome to the show, Naama.
Thanks so much, Marianne. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, it's such a joy to have you here. And gosh, what a topic that needs to be discussed. I mean, most of the time people will cringe and try to run the other direction when we talk about anything that has to do, a lot of times with women's health, especially when it's around this kind of a topic.
Yeah, I mean, Marianne, it's interesting because I've been talking about this book now and this topic for the last few years. And, people like to run the other direction. But one of the things I found is that when you start talking to women about menstruation or about their bodies, they want to keep talking. I think there's a pent-up desire to have some open conversations. And it's great that people like you on your show are now starting to have the conversation.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. It's interesting when we start diving into these topics and start talking about women's health, and especially for young girls that are going through puberty. There's a lot of unknowns, and it's kind of a hush-hush thing. So they're like, what do you expect? When things happen. Your book was really well written. And before we get too far down the road here, I do want to ask you, I know you've been doing this for a while, but what has inspired you on this path?
I started a business called Helloflo about 5 or 6 years ago, and the original idea for the business was actually just to send tampons and pads through the mail on a monthly basis, just a very simple subscription. And as I started developing the business, I spoke to more and more women and more girls. And one of the things that I really discovered in the conversations was when I was talking to mothers of girls who were going through puberty, I
I started hearing a lot of stories about what their daughter's puberty was doing to their relationship, and also just their stress and how to manage it and how to give their daughter the space that they needed, the space she needed, while also maintaining a close enough bond that the mother would be there to be able to provide answers and that the daughter would ask. And all of that information led me to develop something called the Period Starter Kit, which was something I was selling through the mail, which had some educational information and also some products like, pads and stuff. And the more I did, the more I heard from girls and women, and this space of puberty just became really fascinating to me because, like you said in the beginning of the conversation, people don't want to talk about it, but every girl wants to know a ton about it. And I was really fortunate in that I produced a few videos for my business, and they went viral. And then suddenly, people knew who I was and knew about my business. And I had girls and women from around the world sending me emails. Some just saying like, "This is amazing," but others asking really specific health advice. And with girls in particular asking, when will I get my period? Can I shave? How do I ask my mother for a razor? All sorts of questions that I, quite honestly, in the beginning didn't feel qualified to answer, and also felt like, I can't believe these girls are emailing me, a perfect stranger, asking these like very personal questions. And it was around that time that it became obvious to me that there was a hole in the market, and people needed to talk about this and needed to have these conversations in a much more modern way that honors these girls in a way that they're used to consuming information.
Well, I think it honors all women as well, because we're able to have an honest dialogue about something that a lot of times makes people uncomfortable. But the way that you've done it in your book, it's very informative. And I can tell that you've written it for just more that it's just not for young ladies. You've written this book for a bigger audience.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we had girls between 9 and 13 in mind as we were writing it, but after listening to me talk for the next 20 or so minutes, and having read the book, you'll see that the way I speak is very similar to the way that the book is written. So it's very straightforward, and it's just honest. And instead of just saying, your body will change, you'll get breasts, you'll get more hair, and then, an egg will release, and then you'll have your period, we talk about the whole range of changes in your body and your mind and your social relationships, because those are just things that I feel like were never covered in the books that I grew up with.
I would agree with you on that one.
Mm-hmm.
I think the books I grew up with were really lacking in direction, for a lot of things.
Yeah, what I was going to say is, the older books, I think, are much more mechanical, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, this is, this happens, then this happens, then this happens. Mm-hmm. But, I talk about this in the book, but if you think about puberty like a Rube Goldberg machine, where it's like one thing triggers something else, which triggers something else, all of these changes in your body are interconnected, and if you understand it as a whole system, it just makes it easier to process, I think. And, I think one of the other things that's happened in the last, 20 or so years is that the media that kids consume is not different from the media that adults consume. Mm-hmm. So, you have 12-year-old kids watching Walking Dead, but we're giving them content to read that's written for someone who's not exposed to that, right? We're giving them content that's written for someone who grew up watching Nickelodeon the way my generation grew up, or, the sort of after-school specials. And so there's, I think, a disconnect in how we're educating kids versus what they're being exposed to on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm. When you were doing the research for your book, what was like the most surprising thing that came across your desk of like, gosh, we've got to talk about this?
We ended up dedicating a whole chapter to pubic hair, which surprised even us, but it's such a rich topic. And, I was really paying attention to pubic hair trends, if that's even such a thing. But I was noticing in pop culture images, there were many pictures of women with low-cut bathing suits, or even celebrities posing nude on Instagram, where there were not a hair on her body. And I was talking to a lot of younger women that I worked with, like women in their 20s, early 20s, and late teens even, and I learned that so many of them were removing all of their pubic hair. And I just thought, this is so nuts for me, because that's not how it was when I grew up. And what has happened over time? And is this a phenomenon that's new to, the time we live in? Yeah. And as we started doing the research, we realized, in fact, no, this isn't a new phenomenon. This has been going on for ages, where people have been changing the way their body looks, and specifically their pubic hair, for different reasons that had to do with aesthetics. And I thought, this would make it easier for a young girl in society to process and to think about how she wants to live in her body. If she could understand that this is all just a trend, and that you get to choose, just like you get to choose, in the 80s, if you're going to wear fluorescent colors or not, then there's an empowerment that comes with that, with knowing that it's a choice.
Yeah, there's not as much social pressure then to look a certain way based on what maybe a celebrity is doing. Because,
exactly.
When you realize it's a trend, it's like, well, then go do your own thing,
Exactly. And I think that's, generally speaking, the message of the book is that, there will always be people that you think you need to aspire to, or people who tell you how you should look. But at the end of the day, this is all your choice to decide how you want to live inside of your body and how you want it to look. And whatever you feel comfortable with, that's the right choice.
Mm-hmm. Well, and, I really appreciated in your book, you had a whole section in regards to just brain development and what that would look like for a young lady, so that they can at least understand, hey, what's going on with me? My brain's still developing. There's some other things going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, if anyone buys this book and has a young woman, a young girl and a boy in the house, I think that chapter is incredibly relevant for all adolescents going through puberty, because one of the things that was very important to me with the brain development chapter is being able to put into context for kids why, as parents, we're so concerned about peer pressure. Mm-hmm. So, I remember growing up hearing, don't do things because other people tell you to, and, peer pressure, and not understanding why is everyone so obsessed with peer pressure. I know, they say it makes me do something bad, but why are they talking to me about peer pressure? Well, it turns out, once I did the research on brain development, kids are more susceptible to peer pressure because of how their brain development develops and the difference between their limbic system and their prefrontal cortex. And, when you understand that, you're much more willing to take the advice about paying attention to an environment where you feel peer pressure, because you understand that there's actually a physiological reason you're more susceptible as a kid. And I just thought it was super important for kids to know that, and to also have some tips for how to deal with it. Just take a pause before you make a big decision, so that you let that rational part of your brain catch up.
Yeah. So at least they have the ability then to realize, hey, especially for parents that pick this book up and they're reading through this, to really get a sense of, hey, my kid's still having their brains develop, so, there should be a different level of expectation in some ways in regards to, how to approach them.
Absolutely. I think that is spot on. It's just as important for the parents to understand it than for the kids, because there are reasons kids do some of the things that drive us nuts as parents. And, it's like, it's part of why we have to have patience. And as parents, it's easy to love your child because it's your child, but it's also very easy to get frustrated. But when you understand why this is all happening, and especially if a parent and a child reads this book, both read the book, they can have a universal language for talking about these topics, which I think can really help in the relationship.
Yeah. And they have a really good understanding then on what's going on with their bodies, because you kind of, in one of your chapters, you have it kind of mapped out that these are some of the things that on average you can expect throughout these different years. So there's kind of, it's not a surprise like, hey, what's going on here, or what's happening. They've got the information that gives them just at least an awareness of kind of what to expect.
Absolutely. And I think that, as grown-ups, it's hard to remember what that period was like. Like you think, they're a kid one day and then they're grown up another day, but that the transformation is a really messy process for them and is also really uncomfortable. One of the things, yes, they need to understand what to expect, but the other thing that they have to expect that no one remembers they need to expect is this feeling of being inside of a fishbowl. So one of the women, she's a young woman now, but who was interviewed for the book, and there are a few testimonials in there from her, was saying that the thing that she hated most when she was going through puberty was that every time she would see a grown-up and she hadn't seen them for a while, they'd say, "Oh my gosh, look how you've grown." And she just always felt like they were commenting on the fact that she had developed breasts. And it was super embarrassing for her. And the truth is, it probably was that they were commenting on that, but not actively saying you have breasts, but they were noticing this incredibly visible change in her. And she was like, I'm still a kid. I don't want people to be commenting on my body. And, even the most aware adult isn't going to think that saying something like that is going to make a kid uncomfortable. But depending on the child, they don't want acknowledgement of what's going on. And, one of the things I wrote about a lot in the book is this feeling, and I remember it so viscerally, is this feeling of my body is betraying me. Wouldn't it be great if you could just go through puberty in private? You don't want everyone to see the pimples. You don't want everyone to see that you have these breast buds. You don't want everyone to notice that all of a sudden you have leg hair and you're struggling with, should I get rid of it or keep it? But it all happens in this incredibly public way because you look different.
Yeah. Yeah, and do you know what? I'm so glad you brought that up because, I have a dear friend of mine. Her daughter's 11. And she's taller than me. And every time I see her, I was like, gosh, you're just getting taller and taller. And, and now thinking about it and having this discussion, maybe it is making her uncomfortable because, she is so much taller than the rest of the kids in her class. So, it just kind of makes you more aware of, what you're saying.
Well, and it really depends on the kid, too, right? It's like if you have a pimple on your face, you look in the mirror and you think that's the only thing anyone can see. When we comment to someone like, oh, my gosh, you've gotten so big, we may be talking about the whole package. But if a child is feeling really self-conscious about the fact that she's just developed breasts, she's going to think that's what you're talking about, even if you're commenting on her height or on her anything. So it's just remembering that, but also, that's why it was so important in the book for me to acknowledge for the girls, yes, it sometimes feels super awkward, but you're not alone. Every single person is going through this. And, there is some power in numbers, I think, in knowing that even though you feel like you're having the most awkward experience imaginable, the person next to you is thinking the exact same thing.
Yes, but it feels like it's such a personal journey when you're doing it. So, going through this whole process of, having your body change, that it doesn't feel like there's anybody else next to you going through it either.
Yes, well, of course.
Yeah. And your book really offers good talking points, for parents and just young ladies to be able to have that connection and have that discussion happen.
Yeah, we wanted to have, we wanted to have information and, just the basics. And then we also wanted to have interesting facts that people could remark on to sort of create an entry point into a conversation. But yeah, it was written in a way that a girl could read it by herself, or people could read it together, or, the parents can read it first and then give it to the daughter. But I do think it's one of those books where, as a parent, I would want to read it prior to giving it to my kid, because it does go so much deeper than the typical book. And I think that kids are going to have questions. And I think that it's important for their grown-up and for the grown-up in their life to just be prepared and understand the same information. That said, it's interesting. I know my niece has the book, and she's 9. She's a little on the early age for the book because she's still very much has not entered puberty, and her mom gave it to her because, of course, she's my niece, and she started reading it, and she said, "You know what? I'm not ready for this yet." So she could identify she wasn't ready. And my sister at first was like, "No, I think you should read it." And I said to both of them, "Put it in your room. When you're ready, you'll pick it up, and the second you have any questions, call me." I think different kids are going to come to it at different times. And I think a lot of parents are worried, well, what if I give this to my kid and she doesn't want to talk to me about this? Or I've heard from a lot of parents, my daughter refuses to talk about this topic with me. And what I would say is, obviously they need to get the information, and you want them to get the information from a trusted resource rather than the internet. So the best advice I have there is put the book in their room and don't put any pressure on them. They will get curious and they will read it. And when they read it, they'll know you're open to the conversation.
Mm-hmm. At least you're there and available for them.
Absolutely, but they need to consume this information, and it's just so much better for them to consume it when it's accurate and it's presented in a very positive, empowering way. Because, kids go online and they end up in all sorts of places that we don't want them to end up in. And the only way to prevent that when learning about your body is to give them a book or to have a conversation with them.
Yeah, because at least that way you can control the information that they're getting, and you're not having to worry about where they're ending up. Now, I know that recently you just did a piece for Women's Magazine, or Miss Magazine actually, on just in regards to women's health and how doctors are kind of not taking women's pain as seriously.
Well, I think, and I don't have the stats in front of me right now, so I don't want to misquote, but, I think that there have been some studies that have shown that when women report pain, a lot of times it's not taken as seriously. There's an assumption that women are more likely to, complain, for lack of a better word. Mm-hmm. So it's not taken as seriously. And, when it comes to our health, we're our own best advocate, right? And so that's another reason. And that article was really about the need for early health education about your body and maintaining a level of knowledge about your body, because you are your health advocate and you need to know when something is different and when you need to raise the alarm, even if someone isn't taking you seriously.
Do you think that partly has to do with, maybe there's this kind of old stigma that, when women are in pain, it's like, well, you'll get over it. It doesn't last that long. You have to live with it. Those kind of things that sometimes I think that women have been having to deal with when they talk to medical professionals. Or it's kind of like, oh, it's no big deal. You'll be fine. If you think about it, it's really only in the last 10 or 20 years that people even understand how high a rate of heart attacks women have, because for years women just didn't even recognize it, because there's so many aches and pains in our bodies that we live with and that we know that we just assume we have to live with.
So I think that there is a history of not taking women's pain seriously, and even like with things like PCOS and all of endometriosis, these incredibly painful conditions that women have been living with. It's just recently that there are like real medications being developed to handle women's menstrual pain, because in the past it was just assumed, well, it's just cramps like everyone else, takes a Midol. But some women have conditions that create debilitating pain, and in the past they were kind of just told, like, suck it up.
Yeah.
And, you know, now, of course, like, we know that there are conditions that cause the pain to be extreme. But in the past, these women were just, you know, there wasn't an option for them.
No. And what's interesting, it happens more often than not. I know actually two that I'm thinking of right off the top of my head. You know, one lady I know, the pain would get so bad she would pass out. And another one, I mean, she would just be down sick, you know, just completely sick for the entire day because, the different health conditions she was going through. It was just very painful for her. So it's interesting when you look at that and, you know, as far as women's health and then addressing that, you know, these things need to be looked at in a more serious way than they have in the past. It all starts with a discussion.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the way to get agency over your body and yourself is to learn about it, right? I mean, it's very much like boils down to knowledge is power. And, you know, I think I am the best judge of how my body is doing. And, you know, I want my daughter and my son to be the best judge of how their body is doing. So if something is out of whack, they're going to be the ones who have to tell me, right? But they don't know what the realm of normal is. You know, if they don't know what the realm of normal is, and if they're not paying attention, and if they don't understand how different parts of their bodies work, that's going to be problematic. On the other hand, though, part of why, at least with girls and getting their period and the breast development, it is so important for them to learn what it is the converse could be true as well, which is you have no idea and you get your first period and you think you're dying, which, you know, there are so many stories. I can't even tell you how many stories I've heard from women who their first period, they didn't know what it was, and it was just like panic. Or I heard a story recently from a woman who said when she was developing breasts, they felt so tender and they hurt, and she basically diagnosed herself, you know, with breast cancer and was scared to tell her family. You know, she was terrified she was dying. It didn't even occur to her because she didn't know that she was going through puberty, and, you know, tenderness in the breast while your breasts are developing is sometimes what happens.
Yeah, just not really realizing that there's more to that than what she initially self-diagnosed with. You know, it's kind of like, okay, there's more out there, but that's what young brains will do.
Absolutely. I mean, they go quickly, and, you know, as we were just talking about the brain chapter, like the limbic system, which is the much more emotional part of the brain, is more fully developed than the prefrontal cortex, which controls our rational decision making. So it's not surprising that some of these things, that girls are more prone to some of these things, and boys for that matter.
Yeah. When you are having discussions, when you go out and you're doing speaking, are you finding that there's like one specific topic that your audience really wants to hear? Is it like one specific chapter in the book, or is it just the entirety of it?
You know, I've spoken mostly, since the book came out, I've spoken mostly to moms when I've done the speaking events. And, you know, the biggest thing for them is, how do I maintain a relationship with my daughter? And how do I engage her when she wants nothing to do with me on this topic? And, you know, I feel for these mothers, because I remember I didn't want to have anything to do with my mother on this topic either. Like, I knew what it was, and she had done her job in educating me, but I wasn't interested in talking to her about it. So, you know, like I said, my, you know, best advice is get her the information, like get her the book, get her pads, get her whatever she needs so that it's prepared and she knows where it is and it's there for her, and make sure she knows you're there for her. And she'll come to you. She will when she's ready, but more importantly, she'll have the information and she'll have the products. But one other thing, actually, that I really want to point out, which I think is really critical, is when we talk about this topic, we often talk about moms and their daughters. But I do think that this book is really essential reading for fathers as well, because yes, the dads don't experience it firsthand, but they have these little girls that are experiencing it, and, the closest way to be able to be empathetic is to understand a bit more of her experience. And while your daughter may not be forthcoming with you about her experience, it still doesn't mean you're off the hook just because you didn't ever get your period. Yeah. And I think it's important for dads to understand what's going on and why it may feel uncomfortable, or it might be different from their experience growing up as, boys going through puberty.
Do you feel like single dads, are more interested in, reading this book just because to them it could be like completely new information?
Absolutely. I mean, I think single dads or families with two fathers, I think it feels more mission critical for them because they don't necessarily have a female figure in the daughter's life that they could easily have her turn to. Some do, some don't. But so I think for them, it's really important, but I would urge even fathers who are in a heterosexual relationship who are raising a young woman to learn how this thing works. And, it's not so different. Like, there are certain things that are specific to girls, of course, breasts and the actual period, but, hair is pretty common, girls and boys. Certainly the hormones and the brain development is all the same. So I think it's just important information for people to understand.
And move forward. So where can people connect with you and learn more about not just your book, but the videos you've done and be part of your community?
Yeah, so I have a website, naamabloom.com, NAAMABLOOM.com. Of course, the book is available on Amazon and at all booksellers. And then the site that I launched called helloflo.com, which is I no longer run it, but it's a wealth of information about women's health. So that's also a great resource for anyone who's wanting to learn about health and sexuality, specifically related to a woman's body.
Well, Naama, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
It was my absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Marianne.
Well, that's the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.